Well, hello there. This is Virtuals the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. About 3 months ago, I published my new book, 50+2 Chess Quick Wins, Tactical Ideas for Exciting Chess for Beginner Players. And in the opening section of the book, I cover a bunch of different tactical ideas, themes, and motifs that often underlie the quick win. Now, this is the sixth article and video in the series where I go through some of these tactical ideas. In the last video, we talked about making use of semi-open and open center files to make an attack on the king in the center. And much earlier in the introduction video, we sort of explored the scholar's mate and also the Wayward Queen Attack that demonstrated the potential for early queen moves, even though early queen moves are usually risky, generally bad outside of established lines of theory. Now, in today's video, we're going to talk about a particular tactic that sometimes comes out of certain lines, particularly the Englund Gambit, which is one of my favorite openings, where we make use of an early queen move, but in a relatively safer way. So let's have a look at this. This indicative diagram here. So the idea in this tactical theme is that very early on in the opening, we end up placing our queen. So here we're looking at it from the perspective of white. We place our queen on a semi-open e-file. So the kings are on the e-file. The queen has moved in this game to the semi-open e-file. And what effectively happens here is that the opponent's e-pawn ends up being pinned to the king. Now, the implication of this is that firstly, this pawn cannot move to either the d file or the f file. And it also specifically means that the pawn is not defending either of these two squares in this particular example. So that's the d6 and f6 squares. That's the consequence of it being pinned. Now, one of the things here is that can sometimes be quite surprising for the opponent. So in this, again, in this particular setup, it means that a piece, so here the bishop now moves to the f6 square, allowing a double attack, and that can sometimes seem to be impossible because that pawn is pinned. It is not in fact defending the f6 square and cannot capture the bishop in this particular position. Now, the reason why this can potentially be quite a powerful attack is that it's often just not expected. In most common openings, the queen is not on the e-file, a semi-open e-file early on, and so it often is just not part of the calculation of the opponent. And so this tactical resource is simply not seen. And this is particularly the case when the making use of this tactic is hidden or part of another tactical approach as well. So tactics within tactics or layered tactics. This is something that won't be calculated by the opponent, even once they get into higher intermediate levels. And we're going to see this in the two example games. So, game one. Here we go. I'm going to load it up. It's going to be from the perspective of black. It will be a game of the Englund Gambit. So it's from the perspective here of black. White now plays, as you know, with Englund Gambit, it starts with 1 d4, immediate e5, and captures. Okay, so here we've got a doubling up of the pawns, and as part of the Englund Gambit accepted, the usual line that we go down the main line. Firstly, knight attacks that pawn. White best move is to defend. Defend that pawn with their own knight developing move. So knight f6, and now we've got queen to e7, and this is, as I said, is part of the main line in the Englund Gambit. So we will often see it, potentially down this line. Now here, white decides to play G3, so planning potentially on fianchettoing that bishop. So that's a potential approach. It's actually perfectly fine. For us with black, when we have the opportunity to take, we should, and so we capture. And take note here that the knight is at the moment blocking no, it's on that file, but if the knight ever moved out of the way, then the e-pawn is pinned. So it's like a discovered pin on that pawn, and that's something that can be hard to see for the opponent. Now in this game, what white decides to do, they decide not to immediately fianchetto, but instead they think, let's attack the queen, and with the G5 square defended by the knight. That's what they do. It's a blunder. And can you see why it's a blunder? Can you see it? We can make use of that discovered pin. Knight captures the knight. Again, seemingly impossible because we're leaving the queen to hang, but discovered pin on the e-pawn on e2. It cannot capture the knight. The knight gives check and simultaneously covers the only escape square for the king very early in the game. So very little development. The king has nowhere to move. And so this is a very, very interesting 5-move checkmate. Now, we're not going to see this in most games of the Englund Gambit, but you will never see it and never find it unless you're sensitized to this particular tactic. Let's have a look at another game. So this one's a little bit more complicated, and this, again, from the perspective of black, and this comes out of the Budapest Gambit. So again, we start with d4, and now we have f6, natural, fairly normal move, c4, and now a little bit similar to the Englund Gambit with, but this knight is already here. Us attention in the center. This is a Budapest Gambit. They take, and now knight jumps a second time, attacking that pawn. And this tension on the forward pawn of white now on e5 is a similar theme to the last game. So they defend. Here, knight, another attacker. So here we've got two attackers, bishop defending. And now we see the bishop here with check. They opt to block the check with the knight. Seems to make sense. And now the queen. Okay, so again, very similar themes to the last game. A little bit more complex though. And if that pawn was ever not there, then the pawn on e2 will be pinned to the king. White now decides to attack the bishop. And here, black plays a brilliant move. So here it looks like it's black has 1, 2, 3 defenders. It's only attacked, but it's also defended, twice over. There's an attack on the bishop. It would seem logical for black to move the bishop, but black sacrifices the bishop and captures this way. Knight captures, a brilliant move. And here, can you see what white potentially should do? That's right, they cannot take that bishop. They have to do something about this knight, but it's just so tempting because it looks like this trade sequence is losing for white. That looks like potentially almost a free bishop, trading a pawn for a bishop. That looks like it makes sense. So they take the bishop, and now, remember, a discovered pin. Knight jumps forward. Discovered pin. The e-pawn here does not defend the d3 square. It's check. The king has been smothered. Smothered, mate. Absolutely amazing. Good game. GG. Now, I hope you keep this tactical idea in mind. As I said, it doesn't occur that commonly, but every now and then it does show up, and it really can potentially combine, as we saw in the last two games, with that discovered pin. It can be a really, really powerful tactic.